We keep records here of all the authors who come to speak, and I looked up the number of times that Jim Lehrer has appeared. It's something like 14 appearances stretching back to 1992, which must be some kind of record. And our archives may even be missing a few. He's clearly someone who will not fade away. Really, he's 79, and he's here this afternoon with his 21st novel. And not only that, last month there was a new play of his that played at the National Geographic Society. It's called Bell. That was his fourth play, and it's a one-man show about Alexander Graham Bell, who also happened to be the second president of the National Geographic Society. And for those of you who like to keep count, Jim also has written 2 memoirs and a book about the presidential debates, 12 of which he moderated. And by the way, he still has a day job as executive editor of PBS NewsHour. I did read in the paper the other day that he and Robert McNeil have decided to give up their ownership stake in the NewsHour and have been talking to WETA, the program's co-producer, about taking over ownership of the nonprofit program. And Jim also has been quoted recently as saying that he doesn't expect to do any more TV himself, which I think, and I'm sure you all will agree, is really too bad. His signature on-air style of grace and civility and in-depth discussion of meaningful issues is really sorely missed, especially in today's broadcast media environment of hyperventilating, short attention span coverage. Anyway, back to the book. It's called Top Down, and it's related to the Kennedy assassination. But as Jim himself said in a recent interview, this may be, quote, the only book that's ever been written about the Kennedy assassination that is not about a conspiracy theory of some kind. Instead, it's a what-if book that centers on the question, what if the bubble top on the presidential limousine that was carrying Kennedy in Dallas on that tragic day 50 years ago had stayed up? The plexiglass bubble was removed, and as circumstances would have it, Jim, who was then a reporter for the Dallas Times-Herald, was actually at Love Field when the limousine was being readied for Kennedy. Jim had an experience with a Secret Service agent related to the bubble, and this was the seed for the novel, and I'm sure he'll tell you more of the story in a minute. But let me just say the book is quite suspenseful and compelling and does refreshingly stand apart from all those conspiracy thrillers about the assassination. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Jim Lehrer.
My inclination is just to say thank you very much, Bradley, and sit down. This is terrific. I love this, being here as many times as I have been here to Politics and Prose. This is going to be different than the other 14. Is this the 14th, or will this be the 15th, Bradley?
This is the 15th.
This is the 15th. Okay. Well, I know for a fact that the other ones up till now, I always did a bus call. And have any of you been to one of these events with me before when I have been here? Okay, so I always do a bus call. I'm not going to do it today. And first thing I want to say to you all I'm not going to talk about the bus call, but I want to tell you how pleased I am that you would come out on a Friday afternoon, a beautiful Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. I expected, one of the reasons I made my wife Kate go, because I figured, I knew the Rosenblatts were coming, and I knew Jackson Breyer was coming, and Barbara Meade, who was there the other 14 times. Yes. Right. In fact, last time, Barbara, we tried to count them out loud as to how many, and about the bus call. But I knew Roger and Ginny Rosenblatt were coming. I knew Roger would for sure come because he's a writer. That means he doesn't have anything to do, and he'd be out on the streets, anyhow, looking for shelter and drink and whatever. And Jackson is a retired English professor, an expert in in American drama, etc. And he didn't have anything to do either. And the fact is that Jackson and Roger played basketball together in an obscure high school in New York City. And in my recollection, not my recollection, but I was told that the team that you two guys played on together never won a game. Am I? Not so? Not true? Not true. Okay. All right. The book, Top Down, as Bradley said, it is based on a real experience I had. I was a reporter for the Dallas Times-Herald that day. The Dallas Times-Herald no longer exists. It was the afternoon newspaper in Dallas at the time. And the Kennedys were only going to be in Dallas for a couple of hours. They were going to make a noon speech and then go. And I worked for the afternoon paper, so that was all happening right on the middle of all our deadlines. I worked for a cheap, lousy newspaper, but we had 7 editions, so we had deadlines all day. And the main part of this was going to be happening right in the middle of our main deadline. So everybody on the city staff was involved in the covering the Kennedy visit to Dallas, obviously. I was the federal reporter. My assignment that day was to cover the arrival at Love Field and then to stay at Love Field until the Kennedys left. And the whole thing with the bubble top, I had this cheap newspaper, for some reason, paid to have an open telephone line for me to use, and they put it on a little table right by the fence where Air Force One was going to come in, so I could talk to the rewrite desk, and we'd get it, hot news, etc. And we got the word that the plane, the Air Force One, was about to take off from Fort Worth. It's only a 20-minute flight. And I was testing the phone with the rewrite man. The rewrite man says, hey, look, where's the bubble top? Is the bubble top up on the presidential limo? And I said, well, I can't see it. There was the cars, there were 6 or 7 cars that were going to be in the motorcade. They were all parked down a ramp. And I couldn't see down the ramp. I said, well, I can't see. He said, would you mind going in and checking? I said, why? And he said, well, I'm going to be writing under deadline. Just be nice to know when it comes through downtown Dallas whether or not the bubble top is up. And the bubble top, remember, I had written a couple of lines about this because I wrote a lot of the advance stories for the visit, federal security stories about the visit. And I had said that there would be a bubble top available if the weather was bad, because it was strictly a weather situation. It wasn't a bulletproof piece of glass. It was quarter-inch plexiglass in 6 pieces that was put together with snaps. At any rate, I said, okay. So I put the phone down and I walked to the end of the ramp, to the top of the ramp. Well, the Secret Service agent was standing there, who was the agent in charge of the Dallas office. I knew him because I was the federal reporter. So I said to him, and I looked down the ramp, and I saw about 2 or 3 cars down, there was the presidential limousine, and the bubble top was up. So I said to this agent, I said, hey, Rewrite wants to know whether you're going to keep the bubble top up. And he looks up at the sky. I never forget any of this. He looked up at the sky and he said, well, it's clear. See, it had been raining in Dallas earlier that day. So it's clear now. And he yells at another agent who's got a 2-way radio, and he says, check it downtown. See what it's like downtown. So there it goes, blah, 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 and he says, clear downtown. So then the agent turns to the other agents who are around the cars, and he says, lose the bubble top. So I stay there just for a few seconds while they start taking the bubble top down. I go back, I tell Rewrite, and then I go on about my business, and the world goes on about its incredible business, because it was a few minutes later. After the motorcade, everything happened there at Love Field was fabulous. I mean, there were a few hundred people there behind the fence, and it was a great warm welcome for the Kennedys and all of that. And the day had turned beautiful, and everybody got in their cars and they went away. I finished my work on the telephone to the rewrite desk, and then I went inside into the Love Field terminal to have lunch. I was going to meet some other reporters in there, and just as I walked into the restaurant, the waitress came. She was crying, screaming, said, "My God, they shot Kennedy and Connolly too!" And I ran to found a phone. That was before there were cell phones. Got a phone, a pay phone, and how I managed to do it, I don't remember. But anyhow, I got through, and I got the city editor on the phone. He said, "Go to Parkland and then go to the police station." I ended up at the police station. Stayed at the police station all night. About midnight that night, I had heard that there was a meeting going on at the police chief's office, which is on the third floor. There were some people in there. Nobody knew who they were. Nobody knew what was going on. It was chaos. You just have to take my word for it. It was the ultimate chaotic place to be. It was wall to wall agents, cops, reporters of all sizes, descriptions, accents, and whatever. And the mix of emotion it went from absolute disbelief. Can you believe this? And absolute terror that about the event itself, and then terrible grief, and then everybody had a job to do too. What happened? So everybody we were all just kind of whatever. It was extraordinary many hours. Anyhow, at midnight, I went upstairs. It was quiet up there, and there were a couple of other reporters found out about it too. We just stood around outside waiting for the door to open. The door opens finally, and out come 5 or 6 guys in suits, and one of them is that Secret Service agent, the guy who had ordered the bubble top down, and he comes over to me. He was an old man. He was probably 42 years old, and he comes over to me, and I may have imagined this. It sticks in my mind as if it happened, but I couldn't swear to it. But what I think happened, what I believe with all my heart and soul happened, there were tears in this man's eyes when he said, "Oh, Jim, I just hadn't taken the bubble top down." And of course, I go, "Oh my God, if I just hadn't asked the question," and then all the what ifs that go with that. And that was one of thousands of what ifs that happened after the Kennedy assassination. There were people who argued against a motorcade, people who argued against going to Texas in the first place, people who argued having it at Fair Park instead of at the Trade Mart. There were and all the people who touched this event before the assassination had all kinds of problems afterward, small problems and large problems about, oh my God, if I just hadn't done this, if just hadn't done this and this. And this was just one of them, a very, very small one. The people who had the biggest what-if problems, as you can imagine, were the members of the United States Secret Service. And there were, the total visit, there were about 30 or 40 of them, because they were going to various places in Texas, and some of them were advancing Fort Worth, while the others were still going to advance, because he was supposed to go to Austin that night after Dallas. They were advancing. But every one of these Secret Service people, both local, each office in each big city in the United States, has a Secret Service office, and they don't just they're not there just to protect the president and people like that, because that's a very rare event for them. They're usually taking care of counterfeit cases and stolen federal checks and that sort of stuff. At any rate, those people suffered more than anybody did in the what-if situation, because to lose a president is the ultimate awfulness that could happen to a member of the United States Secret Service. And so now then the fiction part of the story, and I embellished even that part of it it's already begun to get to be a little fiction by then, but my fiction story is about a Secret Service agent who, in fact, did order in fiction, ordered the bubble top down, and it consumed him. It caused him to have serious depression problems that led to serious. Eventually, if it had happened today, they would have called it PTSD, because that's what he suffered, and so did a lot of other in the real world. A lot of Secret Service agents suffered PTSD or symptoms like that. A lot of drinking problems, all kinds of problems. A lot of families broke up as they just couldn't handle this, and unfortunately it was not diagnosed as PTSD, and it was considered internally within the Secret Service, as a kind of an embarrassment. I mean, they didn't even talk about it themselves, and they didn't talk to each other, and they didn't help each other. And there was no help was provided. It was just kind of stiff upper lip, move on. One interesting side story that is not in the novel is that there was an inclination at the head of the Secret Service. Let's get these guys out of sight, so they don't ever have to talk about it, and we don't ever have to look at them. And that was a terrible thing for the history of the Secret Service and for the country and all of that. Let's just get them gone. In other words, it's the FBI's version of transfer everybody to Butte, Montana, who screws up. And And they were about to do that. The head of the Secret Service, the people who ran the Secret Service, were about to do that to these guys. And they were all guys, too, by the way, in 1963 with the Secret Service. At any rate, Jacqueline Kennedy heard about this, and she went to see President Johnson personally, went to the White House, and said, I've heard that the Secret Service is going to punish these agents, and Mr. President, I implore you not to do that. It's not their fault. And so Johnson then turned to the head of the Secret Service and said, okay, lay off. Don't do it. And they laid off completely. And but unfortunately, the laying off also involved helping these guys get through the difficult thing. Now, some of them didn't require any training. Some of them went on to have full and healthy careers with the Secret Service. Those people who were there, but a lot of them did not, and their stories have never been told. I tried to find out some details on some of them, and for my book, not necessarily to use them in any kind of factual way, just to I found out enough to know that what I was talking about was real, but I couldn't. They still, but a lot of these guys now are gone, and the families don't none of them really want to talk about it, and they certainly didn't want to talk about it for the record, and etc. I'm not going to tell you anything more about the novel, because then if I tell you too much more, then you will not have the requirement that you read it. And I've made that mistake before, and I'm not going to make it today. So I would just say one thing about writing, because this is a subject that my wife also, Kate has also been here to Politics and Prose. Roger, you're coming in here, what, November 9th. He's written a memoir called The Boy Detective, and I've read it, and it's a hell of a book. The Boy Detective, Roger Rosenblatt, November 9th, okay? Yeah, right. You know, I was just talking to Bradley. I was just going to say one thing, just generally, because every time because of Barbara and Carla and all the history we have had together, all these years that Kate and I have, and our families have with Politics and Prose. I mean, all you have to do is be somebody like me who writes books and then has to go door to door to sell them all over the country, and which I've done now 20-some times. And I know for a fact that this is the finest bookstore there is in the United States of America. On every level by which you would want to judge a bookstore. It has the books you want. If you don't have them, if they don't have them yet, they'll get them for you, just like that. They keep up with they can do ebooks here. You can do just about anything that has to do with the written word. You can do it at Politics and Prose. And these events, Bradley was telling me they've had more events. You said you're having more events this October in the history of Yeah, business is flourishing. What you made? Your profit was what? $2 billion last year alone. Did you know that, Barbara? Had you heard that? Yeah. No, anyhow, it was just great news that Bradley just gave me, and Barbara always gave it too when she was here. And I mean, business is always good at Politics and Prose, and one of the reasons is because the people who work here do their jobs, and they do it beautifully, and they understand the value of what they do, which is these little things that are printed between two pieces of cardboard, and they value also the people who write them, and I'm one of those, and I would like to thank you, Bradley and Barbara, and everybody connected with Politics and Prose, and I'll see you on my 16th visit, which will be any day now. Yeah. Now, if you anybody has any questions or comments, I would just alert you to, there's a microphone here, I would just alert you to the fact, as I always do, sometimes to no avail, but anyhow, this is a literary event. Be my guest.
This is not a literary question. I'm sorry. Where are the neckties?
Where are the neckties?
Your fabulous neckties.
Oh.
You should have given them to Mark Shields.
Oh, well.
Who owns two neckties.
I know. You know, that's the one question that I did not come prepared to answer.
I'm sorry
I
to
don't
be frivolous.
I don't have a cooked answer to that. In fact, I don't even have. I'm interested in hearing you say this. It's now that we've opened up this subject of neckties, because I have people who are very close to me, some of whom are even related to me, who believe my neckties are really, really uncool and very, very whatever. And there's a guy who shall remain nameless, who is on the air to this day, not on public television, but in commercial television, who swears he's never worn the same tie twice. And he goes on the air, 5 nights a week. He just thinks people pay so much attention to his ties. He doesn't want people to think that he would wear a tie twice. And I find that an interesting philosophy. And I wore, and as my wife would say to me, you wear that tie day after day after day, and people, are beginning to talk and think it might smell and stuff like that after a while. No, but I appreciate your question, and I think I've really answered it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sir.
Jim, this is not about Kennedys or top-down, but I don't remember the year, but a few years ago, you wrote a book, Kick the Can.
Yes.
And I just wonder whether you had some early knowledge of what was going to go on with our Congress, their activity or inactivity, or they truly did kick the can.
Oh my God, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, Kick the Can was actually Kick the Can was a very important book in my life. It was this was 25 years ago, and I had a heart attack, and wasn't sure what the future held for me. And when I was recovering, I had a fabulous doctor who said, you ought to make some decisions about how you want to live the rest of your life, whether it's going to be 5 days or 50 years or whatever it is. And whatever it is you have that you want to do, you better get on with it. And by the way, why don't you make a list of those things, and then go make a list of the things you do that eat up all the time that keep you from doing the things you want to do. Anyhow, I did it. And I had on there, get back to my writing, because a combination of daily news job, and which I had having a daily news job, and we had 3 small children, and my writing had just gone by the board. And so when I was recovering from the heart attack, and the girls were a little older then, 3 daughters, and I said, well, okay, now was the top of the list to get back to my writing. And the first thing I wrote was an 8-page thing about a kid watching some other kids, younger kids, play a game of Kick the Can. How many of y'all have played Kick the Can? Okay, well, you know what it's about. Well, this kid is watching these little kids play Kick the Can, and he's watching it, and the can comes up, and it's got my mother always said, be careful, it's going to have a ragged edge on the thing, it's going to put your eye out. Well, I wrote a story about that happening, and from that, I wrote a novel called Kick the Can. And it had absolutely nothing to do with the Tea Party or anything that happened in the Congress of the United States. But it's interesting you would ask that. I thought about that as because it became, as you say, it became the line of the well, they're just kicking it down the can. Oh, they're just I wanted to say, well, my mother would tell them to be very, very careful. In this case, I think they lost a lot more than their eyes. Yes.
That's not exactly on it's on the subject of Kennedy. I wonder what you think of Jim Reston's book saying the accidental target, that it was Connolly they were going after. Is this another conspiratorial theory, or I'm going to sit down and let you answer?
I'm going to open this bottle and pour some water while I think about how to answer that. In fact, I'll use that as a device to do that, because I have great respect for Jim Reston. I know him, nifty guy. And I know, I have not read his book. What little I knew an awful lot about the Kennedy assassination when it happened, and I was assigned by my newspaper to stay on the story, and I did for 6-7 months. And but after that, I didn't stay with it. I had other things. I became I went on and did other things, and so I didn't pay that much attention. So Jim Reston has this theory. It doesn't jive with anything I'd ever heard before. But that doesn't mean he's wrong. It also doesn't mean he's right. How about that? That's worth thinking.
Sir, hi. This is also, I know in the beginning you mentioned some facts. It was always my understanding that it was President Kennedy that made the decision that the top would come off over the objections of the Secret Service. And I don't know, you would know better than I.
That's not literally not true, but it generally is. Here, it was his policy. He's the one who said, "Hey, I don't want that bubble top up, and unless there's a weather situation. Why would I want to go into a public arena like a motorcade and have people look at me under glass?" So he was standing orders, unless there was a weather thing, never put the bubble top up, and because it was never used as a protective thing. And there was some talk, remember there was a lot of talk going in about Dallas being with some of the right-wing types and some of the protests that against Adlai Stevenson, and before that to Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson during the '60 campaign, and a lot of stuff. And there was an editorial page where the other newspaper was very anti-Kennedy, and there was a lot of stuff in the wind that was anti-Kennedy and all that sort of stuff. And so somebody said, they ought to put up the bubble. They should have had the bubble top up, knowing that he was driving through the center of right-wing lunaticville, something like that. But the fact is, Kennedy had already made that very, very clear. And the Secret Service, as far as I could tell, and I don't, here again, I'm no expert on this part of it, but as best I could tell, the Secret Service never took a position one way or another. Never said to Kennedy or somebody who worked for Kennedy, "Hey, I think we should have the bubble top up," because the Secret Service guys didn't see the bubble top as a protective thing either. They saw it was strictly a weather thing, just so the Kennedys wouldn't get wet if it rained, and that's all it was. And so it's hard for me to believe that the Secret Service went to Kennedy or to anybody around Kennedy and said, "Always have the bubble top up," because it doesn't jive with anything that I know about. But here again, I don't know everything about it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I have a question. When you're writing about something like this that really deals with trauma of your characters, is there a method that you use to separate yourself from writing about that trauma so that it doesn't come into your dinner every night or invade your dreams, or does it?
It's a very good question. In the process of getting ready to write this novel, I did a lot of research on PTSD, and in the process of doing that, I got acquainted and became friends with Dr. Frank Ochberg, who is a psychiatrist and who is an expert on PTSD. He began after the Vietnam War, because that's the first time we actually ever used that term, and that's when they first started using it. But Frank was the one who realized that you can get PTSD from other traumas, not just battlefield trauma. And he began a career, not a career, but a specialty in advising law enforcement people and others. People in law enforcement, either intentionally, unintentionally, whatever, through any set of circumstances, occasionally take somebody's life, and either justified or unjustified or whatever. And it's difficult. It's a traumatic experience for everybody involved, including the cop or whoever the officer is who did the shooting. And it was only with Frank's pioneering work that they began to now see that. In other words, police departments, law enforcement agencies are now much more supportive of folks after something like that has happened. In fact, it's almost routine now. And Frank has now opened up a whole other area, which I am involved in. There's now something called the Ochberg Society, which is strictly the trauma suffered by journalists who have covered traumatic events. And a lot of it began with some of the reporters who saw and witnessed some of the aftermaths of some of the massacres in Bosnia and elsewhere. Rosenblatt wrote a tremendous piece for Time magazine that was later a book about trauma suffered by children in various parts of the world. My guess is that Roger There was no way not to write about these things. I remember the first time as a reporter in Texas, in Dallas, when I saw a dead body. First time I'd ever seen. I've been in the Marines, but I was fortunately in the Marines when they weren't shooting people. I was in between Korea and Vietnam, so I was never in combat. But as a reporter, it stayed with me for a long, long time. And now people are beginning to understand that you don't have to, the weapon doesn't have to be pointed at you. You don't have to point the weapon. Just observing it, or just people can have trauma over something they've seen on television. I mean, and all of this is now being taken more seriously than it ever has. And to answer your question specifically, how do you get it out of your head when you're writing about a traumatic event? That was your question, wasn't it? Yeah. Right. My friend Robert McNeil used to say, you know, Lehrer, if you ever a guest on our program, we'd never have you back because your answers are so damn long. But I just proved his point.
It's okay.
But in writing this book, for instance, I found myself in several times when I was recreating things that from the Warren Commission report or some basic research that I had done. There was nothing new or extraordinary. I did get kind of reliving it, you know, and remembering what that was like. And anybody, there may be 2 or 3 of you here in this room are old enough to remember November 22nd, 1963, and that was a traumatic event for everybody. And as Kate pointed out to me, we were talking about this because we're about to go to Texas next week for a symposium about this, how it has affected Dallas. And Kate made the point, and I have to talk about how it affected journalism. And one of the huge effects of the Kennedy assassination on journalism was the effect it had on television journalism. Up to that point, television journalism was just kind of beginning. And, you know, it was straight, it was fine, but it was basically fairly soft. And boom, from November 22nd, 1963, from then on to this very day. First of all, it got deadly serious, journalism did. And it became, the assassination and all the events surrounding it that came afterward became the first shared event we ever had as a people in this country, where we all sat down in front of our television sets and grieved. And through motorcades, through caissons moving down Pennsylvania Avenue, through this funeral, through the whole thing, awful thing. And from that point on, we have always had these shared experiences, and sometimes good, but usually bad. The tragedies that we all share, and that's how we share them. And it all, and the Kennedy assassination was the first one. It was the first shared tragedy we ever had. And still, anyhow, have I answered your question yet? I think I've talked about it enough. Yeah.
Well, I write about. I investigate murders, and I find that I have to create an entirely different space. If I do it like anywhere close to the kitchen or anything like that, so I create a different space and some sort of a ritual.
Stay in your story and keep it apart from your rest of your life.
Right, because otherwise it can permeate, and it does become sort of a transference of trauma because you're dealing with tragedy in many people's lives over and over again. So,
but the other side of the coin is, in order to write about something effectively, you have to be able. Roger Rosenblatt teaches writing, and he would probably tell you, if he didn't, he should. He would tell you, in order to write effectively about something, you have to do your very best to get into the minds of a character so well, even if it's a killer or somebody or a victim. In order to write about it effectively for a reader, so they can have the experience and share the experience, the writer has to be able to. If you stay too far away, you can't do it. And so it's a double. It's just a way I have. Maybe you probably have the way to do it. Everybody has to do it some ways. I know. Well, to be specific, I just remembered a very, very fairly well-known story. William Manchester. He was the designated writer about the Kennedy assassination, approved by Jacqueline Kennedy. And William Manchester had been a Marine in World War II, suffered tremendous. He was in Tarawa. He suffered tremendous things, and so he knew about trauma and he knew about all of this. But he got so involved in the Kennedy assassination while he was investigating the killing itself and all. I happened to meet him during all of that, and in fact, I became a leg man for him in Dallas when he went back and forth and all of that. And he finally, was found, wandering down the mall in the middle of the night while he was working on. He just kind of lost his place, as he said, and they took him to the police and all that. They took care of him and all that. And he went ahead and finished his book and all that, but it finally got to him in some way. And he later wrote about this, and didn't write about it in very specific terms, but he wrote about it in enough terms to say that it was the closest thing to it was when he was at Tarawa in World War II, and when he shot he and his fellow Marines shot a couple of Japanese soldiers who had surrendered, and instead of taking him prisoner, they shot him because the Japanese had just done that to some Marines, maybe the day or two before. And the trauma of that event caused him to act like to do exactly what the other guys had done. And in other words, he wrote about this rather dramatically.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Here.
Come up to the other microphone.
Sure, Brother.
What is this a story that you've been carrying around for 50 years, and it's the first time you're telling? And if so, you got any other stories?
I have talked about it before, and I never ever, even to this day, don't talk about give the name of the Secret Service agent or any of that. I wasn't haunted by it. That's a strong word to use, but it stuck in my head, and I finally decided to do it. It wasn't that I felt compelled to do it. And the answer, do I have other stories like that? Yes, but I'm sure as hell not going to tell you what they are now. I've got hundreds of them. Yes, sir.
Hi. I'm a native Dallasite, and so I grew up, hearing about this all the time.
Yeah.
My parents they had their stories, grandparents. Went to the Sixth Floor Museum when I was a kid. And I was just wondering, with all the books, both fiction and nonfiction out there about the Kennedy assassination, what you find to be the most reliable, the most thorough reporting of all the events and the fallout from it. Of course, in addition to your own on-the-scene reporting. And
Sure. Boy, that's a tough question. There's been a lot of crap written about the Kennedy assassination. And of some of it, after a while, I just got to reading more of it. So there's a lot of stuff that came and went unread by me. So I'm not qualified, frankly, to tell you. When I went back to write this book, I went back to the Warren Commission report, to what some of the other people had written at the time, and some of the things have been written since. But I did not read any of the novels that had been written, because all of them were about conspiracies. Bradley's right. All of the novels are about, if you're going to write about the Kennedy assassination in fiction, it's got to be about a conspiracy. So I wasn't interested in reading some of those, so I didn't read any of those. Some of the, Larry Wright, who's slightly older than you are, also grew up in Dallas. He's a terrific writer, nonfiction writer, wrote a book about 9/11. He's written a book about Scientology that's just been nominated for the National Book Award, as a matter of fact. And he's written a play they're going to do at the Arena stage in April about Camp David. He's a super guy. And he wrote about the Dallas experience, what I thought in a very kind of very straight way. There are all kinds of stories about, and a lot of them wrong, about what Dallas was like in November 1963. You were probably not born yet, right?
No, my mom was a freshman in college.
Your mom was a freshman in college?
She was at SMU.
Thanks, I needed to be told that, right?
I was still a ways away.
Well, I bet where was she in Dallas on that day?
Yeah, she was in English class actually at SMU.
At SMU. Well, I mean, that
Somebody
was
came running in.
yeah. In other words, I can't. I can't. Maybe probably 3 hours from now, I'll think of something. Some titles of some books that make sense that I could recommend to you to read if you're interested in reading about them. But they don't jump to mind now. I'm sorry.
No worries. I'll
Okay.
be here for your 16th appearance and ask.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
This is a very small question, but you used the term must be a literary term. You used it several times. I didn't know what it meant. What is a bus call?
A bus call, it is a literary event, literary term. It's in bus depots all over America. They have public address systems, and so if you're a passenger waiting to catch the bus, let's say you're in Victoria, Texas, which is
I've
halfway.
been in Victoria, Texas many
Oh,
times.
you've been to Victoria?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's Victoria, as you know, then it's halfway between Houston and Corpus Christi. Let's say that you're in the bus depot and you're waiting for the bus to Houston, and of course you don't know when to go outside and get on the bus. And the only way you can find out is by listening to the public address system. And so this is what would happen. You hear a little thing in the PA system, and then you'd hear a voice that would say, "May I have your attention, please? This is your last call for Continental Trailways, 8:10 p.m. Silverside's air-conditioned through-liner to Houston, now leaving from lane 1 next to the building. For Inez, Edna, Ganedo, Louise, L. Campo, Pierce, Wharton, Hungerford, Kendleton, Beasley, Rosenberg, Richmond, Sugarland, Stafford, Missouri City, and Houston. All aboard! Don't forget your baggage, please." Now, that is a literary thing because I put that in a novel of mine about a bus driver that drove for Trailways in the 1950s, and I did a bus call, and I do a bus call every time I come to Politics and Prose. Anyhow. I missed one of those stars. I know that. Thank you. Edna. Yeah. Those towns were named after the daughters of the guy who started the railroad back in the 1800s. That's how they named those. All that part of the country was settled by railroad people, and they would say, "Oh, well, what do you want to call this place?" "Well, let's name it for Sammy Sue's kid." "Okay, well, let's name it for the assistant passenger agent's granddaughter or something." And that's why Inez, Edna, Louise. I don't know how Horton got in there, but that's Horton Foote's hometown. He grew up in Horton. Look, thank you again for coming, and I appreciate your coming to Politics and Prose, and appreciate Politics and Prose, and thank you for caring enough about the written word to come here today and all other days. Thank you very much.